All right, welcome back. So now that we're all set up and ready with setup number 2, we're ready to create the first machining operation and only machining operation for this setup. Now, as you can see, there's a pocket that we have here. Normally what we would do is we would come in, we would rough this pocket, and then we would finish it. So it's only a total of 2 operations, but it's okay. I'm going to show you how to get that done with 1 operation. And this can go with any complex part. It doesn't have to be just a pocket. It can be multiple pockets and all kinds of depth, okay? Let's go ahead and get started with that. Now first, come over here under your toolpath group, and I want you to find that red arrow that indicates that's where my next operation is going. As you can see, you cannot see it right now because it's underneath setup number 1, and it's actually right after this first operation. So right now, if I create the next operation, it's gonna include it under setup number 1. So let's go ahead first and create another toolpath group, because right now, if I expand this and try to move that arrow all the way down and minimize this, you'll notice that the red arrow is still inside of here. So let's go ahead and right click on machine group, go to groups, and select new toolpath group. Now select that toolpath group and call it setup number 2. And now you see where that red arrow is. Okay, so that's where we want it to be. We want it to be under setup number 2. And this is very helpful for those coming in and playing around with the program later on to understand that, okay, this is the first setup, this is setup number 2, and this and that. And if you want to even be more detailed, go to setup number 1, call it setup 1 top, and this one we'll call it setup number 2 front. This will tell whoever comes to use the program later on exactly what view that is. All right, now let's go ahead and get started. Go to toolpath, expand the gallery, and select FBM mill. All right, so this is your FBM mill dialog box and all the options. There's going to be a lot more options in here than there was in the drill. And that's because for drilling, all you could do is chamfer, spot drill, and drill. For milling, you have the options to do facing, roughing, rest milling, finish, and also finishing. So there's a lot of stuff you can do in here, a lot more than the drilling. So let's go ahead and get started from the top at setup. Setup, you want to definitely select automatically initiate feature detection. This way you can come in and detect all the features to machine. All right, for here, tool selection, you can select preferred tooling if you have your own tooling selected and preferred. I usually like to use tools, use the tools in part file, also use the tool library and create tools as needed. And this is your mill inch tool library selected. And under comment, we can call this FBM mill, and you can call it pocket or front. Okay, search plane, you definitely want it to be on the front new plane. Now this will be by default, but if in case it's not, go to front new plane and select it. That's the plane that we created in the last video and named it. Now group and by, you can have the machining operations grouped by the features and zones, or minimize tool change. And I highly recommend using minimize tool change. This way your tool is not being used and then goes back to the next feature and used again, and you're having way too many tool changes. Remember, you always want to minimize your tool change to save a lot of time in machining. Okay, now you can also have this to select to rough outside of the part and finish outside of the part, but we don't have any machining done on the outside of the part, so keep those unchecked. And if feature depth exceeds long length, what do you want to do? Do you want to create one tool for all depth? Do you want to create one tool for each depth, or create tools and length increments by this much? I highly recommend keeping that first option there, and that's very helpful, especially whenever you have a hole, for example, that is 1/2 inch and another hole here that is 3 inches. Well, it will pick a tool that can machine the 3 inches, and it will use that tool to machine that 1/2 inch. So it's very important to have that checked. Let's go to feature detection. You don't need to have through feature here, but even if you have that here, it doesn't matter. If there is no through holes, it's not going to machine them. So whether you have that checked or not, it does not matter. Edge curves. You want to have place edge curves on first unused level greater than 1000. Okay, now I always leave this at that, and it's always good to do that. Recognize holes greater than this diameter as features. If there are holes that you do not want to drill, okay, you want to machine, okay, you want a hole mill basically, you would tell Mastercam right here that, hey, any hole greater than 1 inch, you basically don't have a drill for it maybe, or you just want to make sure that you hole mill it or treat it as a pocket. This is where you specify the biggest hole that you want to leave without drilling it. Okay, so say you only want to drill 1/2 inch and under, you would place over here 1/2 inch to make sure that, or a little bit more than 1/2 inch, just to make sure Mastercam recognizing anything greater than that half an inch as a milling operation. And here you can specify, do you want to machine it as a pocket or hole milling? All right, so there's facing, roughing, rest mill, and finish. They are all the same here, and all they're trying to do is basically allow you to specify what kind of tools do you want to use if you're doing a face milling operation. For example, over here, if there's a face milling operation, it's already set up for me to use a 2-inch diameter tool to a 6-inch diameter tool. So Mastercam will only pick tools between 2 inches and 6 inches, incrementing by 1 inch. And you can also allow use of face mill, bull nose, or flat mills. So same goes with roughing, rest mill, and finishing tools as well. If there's no tools here, remember these are the preferred tool list that we were talking about under the setup. If you select that, it will only use these tools that are over here. Okay? If there's no tools here, you can right click. You can either select one from the tool library over here, or you can actually create your own tool as well. Let's go to cut parameters. Under cut parameters, you can enable facing if you like, even though there is no facing. So usually when there is no options for something, I usually like to turn it off. Okay? So I'm going to turn that off and go to roughing. For roughing, I will leave that as enabled. I will use climb cutting method, and I will use XY step over as default, which is going to be 40% of the tool. For the depth cut, you can specify that depth cut, and it's usually specified by default depending on the tool that it uses. So I like to use default. Stock to leave on the walls. We're going to leave 20 thou, or we can go ahead and leave 25 thou on the walls. And entry method, you can either select profile ramp or helical entry. And output 3D arc moves. Let's go ahead and go to rest mill. We're not really using rest mill, so go ahead and turn that off. Rest mill is when you come back in with another tool and finish off maybe corners or radiuses. We did not enable floor finishing. Remember, under the roughing, we said 0 for floor, so this is turned off right away. But we did enable 0.025 on the walls, so wall finish is enabled. All right, and we want to make sure to leave 0 on the walls after we create our finishing operation. So for the finish passes, just use the default, or you can specify the one pass, for example, depending on how much overlap you want as well, or percentage of the tool. But like I said, leave it at default. And Mastercam is very, very good at detecting exactly what it needs to use depending on the tools that it selects. Depth cut as well, use the default. Cutting method as climb. We're going to leave entry and exit as tangent. You can have them in perpendicular if you want as well. Hole milling. We are not hole milling. It'll ask you to turn it on if you want. Say no. And let's go to link and parameters. We're going to leave the clearance stock model plus 1 inch. So from the stock model plus 1 inch. Retract, we're going to leave that, change it to half an inch. And feed plane to 0.25. We're going to go all the way down. Make sure coolant is turned on. And features, we want to enable detect over here. And this will detect the features for us. It will know that there's a minimum radius of 0.25. That's the radius right here in the corners. And there's a depth of 0.5. That's the depth of the pocket. So that's all you need to make sure that it does recognize them correctly. Okay, the way to figure that out also is to go back to the drawing and make sure that the radiuses are as follows. So this is actually a drawing for another part. I'll go ahead and open up the model for this. Okay, so this is my model. And what you can do is click on the model over here. All right, so this is the cutting extrude. You can see that the radius is 0.25 and the depth is right here. If you select this radius, for example, is going to be, zoom in real quick, 0.5. So this is how I verify what that is. All right, so now that I have everything all good, go ahead and select OK and allow Mastercam to create your machining operation. And as you can see, it actually created after that, just like I told you would happen before. So as long as you have that arrow in the second one or in the next one, it will create its own toolpath group and it will create everything in there. To move your FBM mill inside of here, all you need to do is select it and drag it to the setup number 2 and let go. And you'll have all these options. Make sure to select make subgroup. And that will place everything in the setup number 2 front. Now you see FBM mill there. And you can see that there's only 2 operations. So make sure there's only 2 operations. The first one is a 2D area mill and the second one is a standard pocket operation. Let's go ahead and make sure to select setup number 2 and verify selected operation. and go ahead and select play. So there's your roughing operation taking place. I'll go ahead and make it faster. And then it comes in and machines the finishing operation with the radiuses with the same tool. So a very fast operation, takes 13 minutes to complete. And there you go, we've completed with the second setup. So in the next video, we'll create the third setup to machine the right side of my part.